In measuring health services, we need basically three things. We need to know what's produced, how it's produced, and what's the benefit to consumers. We do know a lot about what's produced. We have information on activities such as number of operations. The quality of the data varies by country, but it's reasonable. We know quite a lot about how it's produced. We know how many doctors and nurses are employed. We know something about purchases of drugs, although there is some lack of information on how effective those drugs are. We know something about capital equipment, although we'd like to know more about what type of capital equipment. But in terms of how health services are produced, we do know quite a lot. The real gap is on the benefit to consumers. We know how to measure the benefit to consumers. We know the kind of things that impact on consumers, like mobility, freedom from pain. But what we don't do is we don't systematically collect the data that allows us to measure this aspect of the health services. And so there are particular challenges in the health services. It's very much of relevance, I think, to policymakers, government who are providing the funding for health services, for the providers of the health services themselves, and from the point of view of consumers who can be able to gauge the effectiveness of the treatments they're receiving. In the INDICSER project, we're attempting to produce indicators of performance of service sectors, and this covers a whole range of service sectors, for example retail, trade, financial services, business services, education and collective services by government as well as health. For example, the financial services, we're looking to see if we can do something better than current measures that adequately take account of risk, and I think the financial crisis has heightened the need for these kind of measures. In addition to output measures, we're looking also at indicators of drivers of growth and productivity, looking at indicators of innovation, intangible investments such as on-the-job training, and indicators of the market environment in which services operate, for example regulation, product and labour market regulation. And we hope at the end of the project to build up this very large body of evidence on the services sectors, which will be useful for policy. The EU KLEMS project was an attempt to calculate internationally consistent measures of outputs and inputs. And since that project finished, there's a whole range of projects funded by the EC, which form a cluster of projects. For example, InnoDrive and Co-Invest look at investment in tangibles. INDICSER I've just explained, and there's another project, WIOD, on input-output tables and international flows. All of these projects are necessary in order for us to understand where growth arises and issues of structural change. For example, the importance of service sectors. Evidence suggests that the United States has gone ahead of Europe in terms of productivity, and that seems to be mostly in service sectors. So these projects are important in terms of getting this information that allows us to evaluate trends in productivity. A large body of evidence now that suggests that university education is very important in terms of adopting and diffusing new technology. And this really came to the fore in with the use of information technology. So it does seem to be the case that university education is important for modern technology, but this varies by country, and in some countries which are much more concentrated in manufacturing, for example in Germany, in the Eastern European new member states, vocational training and craft level qualifications are probably relatively more important. So there does seem to be university education is important, but it's not necessarily the same importance everywhere and depends on industrial structure. So I think it's always important for us to increase the level of human capital. The question is it correct to keep increasing the level of university education? University education is very expensive, and there is some evidence that even though, as I've just said, university education is important for new technology, as technology develops and becomes easier to use, there may be less demand for university education. And so maybe we should start looking at possibly is money spent on education necessarily well spent if it's targeted at universities rather than increasing, say, literacy and numeracy at the secondary level. I think what's important here is though that those people who have very low skills, who have very low education, low numeracy skills, tend to be marginalised in our society. They tend to be low paid and get stuck in low paid occupations. And so we should always, I think, be increasing the level of human capital. The question is which type of human capital rather than the increase. I think in the medium term what we need is more investment and more innovation And so we need to develop the culture, the economic conditions for this, and this seems to require governments to get their finances in order so that firms and banks are confident about the state of the economy, and so we get back into investment. So it does seem to be, we have to look at these hard choices of really getting government finances under control in the medium term. I'm also coordinating a project, the SERVICEGAP Project, and this, unlike the other projects I've just mentioned, it's not about measurement, it's much more about the analysis of the drivers of growth. So we are looking at things like investment in intangibles, and here we're looking to extend the definition of intangibles to look at things like trust and fear and work ethics, looking at linkages between manufacturing and services, looking at regulation, and in particular the regulation of professional services and how that affects growth, and the regulation of labour markets. So that's one strand of the project. A second strand of the project is looking at the firm level and looking at firm strategies for innovating, firm strategies for diffusing new technology such as information technology and outsourcing this. And a third very large part of this project is internationalisation of services. So services have become much more, produced much more internationally. There is some trade in services, but this tends to be quite small relative to manufacturing, where the activity is in investment in services through mergers and acquisitions, through international outsourcing and offshoring of services. And so a large part of the project is going to look at internationalisation of services, and at the end we hope we will have a piece of analytical work that really does show how services have developed in Europe, and again to provide some guidance for policy.